Chase, I'd like to ask you one brief question go back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of wokeism. My friend Peterson over in the live stream says, asking the question about the pride parades having highly specialized behavior and public nudity. Is that something you're okay with?
So, first off, there's a lot of different kinds of pride parades out there. There are
Mm.
certainly ones that don't have any of that stuff. I've been to several that are what you would say is completely family friendly. But in terms of, public nudity, not really my flavor. But again, I don't think it's necessarily like a trying to coerce people into having sex with people. It's more about body freedom and self expression. Not something I'm really into. Like, I like to keep my clothes on when I'm in public most of the time.
Right. You're not
But
into it, Chase, but should it be legal
could it be illegal?
to be naked in front of children?
I mean, it happens at every Mardi Gras, but no, I don't really think you should
Does that
be
make it
targeting
okay?
kids with nudity. But I think that ultimately a lot of states and cities have public indecency laws that basically say you can be nude so long as you're not trying to be sexually suggestive. And there's been naked bike rides that have happened over the last 50 years. It's not, and the main thing I want to say is this is not just gay pride parades. That's the biggest thing that I have a problem with is that people are like, oh, gay pride parades are where there's public nudity. There's public nudity in a lot of places.
Right, but it
And
just
if you
feels like
travel to
it's
Europe,
trying to
nearly every
deflect.
beach
But
has
Chase, it just
nudity.
feels like it's trying to deflect from the issue. And I mean, this is like one of the major things that Americans are talking about right now. And I know that, you'd like to see a culture war ceasefire, but war is war, and it's kind of like, there's an old statement, I think it was a Mark Twain quote, is that, people who get themselves involved in altercations between two people who are in a fight will often find their own noses bloodied. So at the end of the day, how do you get involved in a conflict like Russia or Ukraine, for example, without getting ourselves, bloodied and battered? How do we call an end to that war, right? Is it not the job of the president of the United States to try and mediate some kind of a ceasefire between those two powers at war right now?
But yeah, so back to the issue that you were mentioning. Here's the thing: pride parades have been happening for a long time. Public nudity has been happening for a long time. If you go to Europe and near to any beach, you're going to see sunbathers who are nude. It's not about nudity; it's about sexuality. If you're trying to push your sexuality onto kids via nudity, via that is wrong, and I would oppose it. And I don't think it really belongs in a pride parade, mostly because there is a family-friendly audience. But I don't set those rules. So but I don't think it's probably the most helpful thing to be doing there. But at the same time, I also am somebody who's not going to be puritanical about nudity because like I said, I've understood that if you travel outside of the country and you go to a beach, you're going to see people topless or sunbathing nude, and there's no problem with that. I've just got back from Pork Fest. There were naked people all over the place there, a giant libertarian festival. Nobody was trying to push that onto kids. I think
But
that's
there
a
were
I think
kids
that's a
there.
big. Huh?
There were kids there around the nudity.
I mean, I wasn't really paying attention to the nudity, but there were naked people there. Yeah.
Right.
And there were also families there. And I don't know, there's the ability for naked people to exist in the world without it being merely about sex. Like I said, sunbathing is the biggest example. But no, I don't support that at a pride parade because I don't think it's helpful to the message. Ultimately,
Okay.
pride is about commemorating Stonewall, which is an anti-police action. It's about people standing up and fighting back for their self-expression. And I can see where some people think that might belong there, but I ultimately want it to belong in the realm of people being able to be themselves and self-expression without maybe harming other people. And I can see where parents have a problem with it. So
Yeah.
I would not advise that people do that.
No, for sure, Chase. And forgive me if it seems like I'm pressing you on this issue, but I promise you that it will be a main issue if you do become the Libertarian presidential candidate. Because if you read the news, it is a story every single day. I mean, the biggest movie in the world right now is The Sound of Freedom. And these are things that you're going to need to have, good answers
Yes,
to. So that's why I
but
asked you. And
child
because
sex trafficking is not pride parades. That's a different thing entirely.
well,
No, that's a different
when you
thing
see, yeah,
entirely.
but when you see pride parades and you hear them say, "We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children," and you see these highly sexualized drag shows that are inviting children to come in, and you see the community advocating for things like bringing children into drag queen story hour, and you see the pictures of them with their nutsacks hanging
So,
out the side of their
so
women's underwear that they're wearing at these are at least tangentially related issues.
So I've actually been to a drag queen story hour. I went to Rome Pride last year in Rome, Georgia, in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. She was
Mhm.
protesting the Pride because they were having a drag queen story hour. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go see what this is all really about and see how dangerous this might be to kids. And what I saw was somebody who's in a dress, basically a la Mrs. Doubtfire. They're about as clothed as Mrs. Doubtfire, reading a story to kids about how you can be yourself and how everybody can grow to be their own butterfly. And then the most offensive part was they sang a lovely, rousing round of Baby Shark. That is not dangerous. Sex trafficking is dangerous. People
Mhm.
who really want to harm children are dangerous. The most common people who are going to abuse your kids are family members, close people associated to your family, and people in authority. If you don't hang around drag queens, you don't have to worry about drag queens. And like, I don't
So
think
so drag queens, drag shows that allow underage people, that's okay.
depends on the drag show. Let's talk about, okay, drag itself is an art form that has multiple different levels. You can be completely sanitized and clean, and you can be completely adult only. It's
Chase,
just
have
like
you
the
ever been
movies.
to a sanitized and clean drag show in your life? Because let me tell
I
you,
was just at one. I just
I've
described one
okay,
at
I
Rome
have
Pride.
been to dozens, okay, dozens, okay? I'm not a social conservative. I have never been to a drag show that was not highly sexualized. Dozens of drag shows in my
And I
life.
guarantee you, every one of those was at a bar, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're doing it at a pride parade as a story time, you're not doing that. There's a difference between G-rated movies and R-rated movies,
Mhm.
and we trust that parents, not the government, parents can decide the level of acceptability for their kids. That you can decide as a parent whether your kid can go into an R-rated movie and see gross violence or gross sexuality on a movie screen. But if you want to take your kid to go see somebody read a story that's somehow controversial and deserving of scorn or disrespect, I believe that parents should be able to make those
Why do you
decisions.
think that the drag queens want to read to children?
Because I think that they are performance artists and they want to be able to have different levels of performance art. It's the same reason as why do the Wiggles sing to children? Because they want to have a marketplace to kids.
Chase,
They want to be able
The
to
Wiggles is made for children. It's obviously family friendly material. Drag queens are not what you call family friendly kind of entertainment.
okay, but a man in a dress is what drag is, right? Let's just be real. A man in a dress or a woman in a suit is what drag is.
Mhm.
That is not inherently sexual. There is inherently sexual drag, and you're not going to convince me. I mean, I'm not going to defend otherwise. There absolutely is, but there's also the ability to perform as a man in a wig without being sexual, and that is what this is. And I guarantee you, if you act like I said, I went for myself because I was like, why are there people protesting this thing? I want to see what this drag queen story time is myself, and I want to see what it is. And nothing sexual was going on. And I think that is the truth for 99% of this. And I
So you
think the real slander to the
would you take
community
your
is that
kids to a drag queen story hour? Or
would I take my kids to a drag queen
would you
story
drop
hour?
your would you drop them off at a drag queen story hour
I
and
don't think
just
that's what happens. Most of the time, the parents are right there with the kids. But
but I'm asking you, would you drop your kids off at a drag queen story hour and come back an hour later?
would you drop your kids off in a movie? Yeah. I think if there's nothing inherently sexual going on, yeah, I'm not worried about that stuff. I'm more worried about the fact that there are coaches out there, priests out there, scout leaders out there. Those are the people who are actually abusing kids, and they're not in the news every week the way gay pride parades are. That's the real problem. Is that and yeah, I'm sure there are drag queens out there who have abused kids because every subset of humanity, there's some monster out there.
Mm.
But I think the focus on solely on drag queens when it's far more likely that your kid's going to be molested by a teacher or a priest or a scout or a coach. That's the real problem there, is that we're not putting our focus where the real abuse of children is. The real abuse of children is with authority figures, not with the drag queen that you take your kids to go see a show. If you take your kids to go see a rock concert, unless you're, the
All
rock,
right.
the rock and
I
roll
get it.
singer is
Chase,
not
I
going to
don't
be
want to make your
abusing.
whole interview about this, but I do want to move on to one other related issue in a sense, and then I'd
Mhm.
like to ask you about some economics. In regards to biological males competing in female sports, what is the role of government?
The role of government is to allow individual leagues to make their own choices and decisions. I think if the Olympics want to have their own standards, the NCAA wants to have their own standards, they can have their own standards, and you can either participate and watch or not. That's the free market. I don't think the government really needs to install itself in sports. That as a minarchist, I don't think that's one of the essential functions of a federal government. So I believe that individual leagues can make those decisions. And I think each sport is going to be its own thing. Like certain sports are clearly going to have a delineation and others aren't. So, and I'm not a sports expert, but I'm going to allow those who are to make those determinations, and I'm going to allow the free market to react accordingly. So if one league is doing something you don't like, another league can be doing a different policy.
What do you think about it personally? If you had a daughter who was in a track and field and she was getting dominated by someone who was a biological male, what would be your thoughts, as a parent?
I don't have a kid and I don't have a kid in sports, so I really don't really put a lot of thought into that exactly. But I can imagine some parents are upset about it. I can imagine some parents, say, "Hey, that's their politics and whatever." Again, it's not my job as a politician to be making those determinations. That's the job of a league. And if you want to support a league or if you want to support an organization, you can do that. That's the free market. Government doesn't have a role there. And as a
Right, but it doesn't
minarchist, I would
strike you,
reject
but
that.
it doesn't strike you as ridiculous.
I mean, I don't know, honestly, because I don't spend my time studying track and field and the differences there. I can say, I can probably can see some inherent unfairness there, but I don't study that stuff. I don't pay attention to sports, and it's certainly not to trans athletes, which, by the way, trans athletes make up probably a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of this. This is an instance that should not, again, be national news. How many instances are there of trans athletes out there? Like compared to cisgender athletes, like let's be realistic. Is this an issue that really matters in sports? I'm more concerned. Again, we want to talk about abuse. Let's talk about the sexual abuse that happens with gymnastics coaches. That's a bigger story. Far more athletes were affected by Larry Nasser than a trans athlete.
Is it the proper role of government to prevent the mutilation of the genitals of minors?
I mean, I believe that gender affirming care doesn't involve minors getting genitally mutilated surgery. So I would say I'm fine with setting that as an example, saying don't have any surgery before 18. That doesn't mean you can't have gender affirming care. But I believe if you're going to have that as a policy, we should also be outlawing circumcision with exceptions for religious, for exceptions for religion.
I don't even
So
think that
if that's
there
what you
should
want
be
the standard to
exceptions.
be, then
I
I
don't even
think,
think there
yeah,
should be
that's what the
religious
standard should be.
exemptions for circumcision, but that I'm glad you pointed that out. So just to make sure that I'm clear on this one, you're saying that that doctors should not legally be allowed to provide surgery on the genitals of children in that
Yeah,
sense.
but I also think that the instances of that happening are nearly non-existent. And I
Right, it's
think
growing
again,
every day. It was happening hundreds of times here in my home state of Missouri, where the hospital actually got shut down because of the
well, no,
amount of.
hundreds of
Yes,
times.
yeah, yeah. You should
How
take
many
a
how
look at
many
this
trans
example.
how many trans kids are on hormones therapy in the country, the
Probably
whole country?
thousands, to be honest, Chase. But I mean, it's something that you should look into. The St. Louis hospital, which closed down recently after the whistleblower came out to talk about all of the horrible after effects that had happened to these children who had been brainwashed and then coerced into surgeries. So, just to make sure that I'm clear, you say that it should be banned, this surgery on children.
Yeah, if you're talking about what is commonly referred to as bottom surgery,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't believe that that's something you should have to have as a child. I also believe that in a world where we have proper gender affirming care, the dysmorphia won't be as as pronounced in young people. So there won't be as much of a desire for that stuff, as long as we're actually allowing kids to socially transition and treating trans and non-binary young people to be able to do that stuff. And again, we're talking about, by the way, when we talk about trans kids, we are talking about a small, infinitesimal small number of people, which have had a huge microscope placed upon them and used as a wedge politic. And I don't like that. I believe that parents and doctors should be setting care for their kids for the most part. I don't think that that's the realm of government. Again, as a minarchist, I don't think the federal government should be setting that policy. I think that's the policy between a parent and their doctor and their affirming care. If they want to go through that stuff, that's freedom. And you can like it or not like it, but I believe that a parent and doctor should be making those decisions in consultation with the child,
Mm.
because that's ultimately the authority figure, the patient, and the doctor. There's no room for government in there. And I think, and I believe coercion one way or the other is wrong, excuse me. Uh, but I'm not going to say, hey, we should stop outlawing all gender affirming care as we've seen in states all over the country, because what that's doing is that's actually limiting the ability of a parent, a doctor, and a child to make the best healthcare decisions, including things like social transitioning and other gender affirming care that is not surgery. I think there's this confusion that every trans child is going to have surgery. Not every trans person has surgery. First off, it's very expensive. A lot of trans people will never go through any kind of surgery in their entire life because they can't afford
You
it.
would consider a doctor performing that surgery on a minor to be an initiation of force?
I believe that as a person who is under the age of 18, you do not have the ability to consent to such a medical decision. At the same time,
Therefore therefore, the
yeah.
doctor would be committing an initiation of force, correct?
Yes, I suppose that's the way you would identify that. But
Okay.
I like to think of it as, that is not something that I would support. Again, you can do this, you can have plenty of gender affirming care without surgery under 18. I
Right.
don't think that that's an unnecessary step. I believe that there's an age of adulthood for a reason, and that is part of it, is to be able to make major medical decisions.
Mhm.